Hello! The official winner for the Women's Prize for Fiction 2023 is going to be announced on June 14th, and amidst all of the excitement and speculation about which of these books is going to be declared the winner, I've been wondering, what if instead of a small group of esteemed judges choosing a shortlist and winner, what if this was selected by popular vote, or looking at the highest average ratings amongst readers? And so that is what I'm going to do today. It's just a fun exercise, and the best way to do this is by looking at Goodreads, looking at the average ratings for all of these different books, and coming up with possibly an alternative shortlist and a winner based just on these popular votes. I did this recently for the International Booker Prize. People really enjoyed it. Some people asked if I would do it for the Women's Prize as well, and I found it really fun to do. So I'm going to do that again. Obviously, this is far from comprehensive or authoritative. Not everybody uses Goodreads. Not everyone has read all of these books, and not everyone has access to all of these books. Some of them were published earlier last year. Some of them were published more recently, so not everyone has had a chance to read all of them, but it'll just give you an idea and an overview, and to add to the fairness of looking at how readers have many different opinions, as well as looking at the average star rating for each of these books, I'm going to read a selection from the 5-star ratings of each of the books, and also the 1-star ratings from each of the books, which might be kind of difficult because I really loved reading some of these books. So reading some criticism about them, I'm gonna have some feelings about it, and Goodreads readers tend to get quite spicy in their opinions. But what's really interesting is that as often these reviews say as much or more about the readers and where they're coming from as they do about the books themselves. So this is going to be really interesting to look at. I've not looked at all the ratings and how they compare with each other, so I'm going to be discovering this as we go along. Also to say, I've not read all of these books yet. I've read quite a few of them, but if you want to know my thoughts and opinions about these books, I'll put links to my full reviews in the description below. Since this is obviously all about other people's opinions, but I'm going to interject my own opinions as well. To start off, we have Glory, which has been nominated for many literary awards. Lots of people have read and discussed this book. So this novel has an average star rating of 3.74 that is based on 3,376 ratings. A 5-star review comes from But I Thought, that's their handle, and they say, "When I say the reader laughed and cried, what I mean is the reader laughed and cried. Tholakuthi cried." That's a word that's repeated quite a lot in this novel, Tholakuthi, and laughed. Because even the sticks and stones will tell you that sometimes history is so painful, so brutal, the only way to make it digestible is to lace it with humor. And yeah, that's a really good point. The satire in this book really brings alive and shines a different light on these tragic events and political turmoil, and so yeah, I thought this novel was really powerful and moving. Then we have a 1-star review, which comes from Doug, who says, "Not since the execrable Booker winner Milkman has a fellow nominee, and let me call it right here and end the suspense, undoubtable winner, been so thoroughly unreadable. I would have DNF'd it early on had I not been a completist and refused to let it tarnish my record of reading the complete long list for 9 years in a row." So this obviously comes from someone else who follows book prizes really closely, and this review was written before the winner of last year's Booker Prize was announced. So this was on the shortlist for last year's Booker Prize, and he was obviously wrong in his prediction that this did not win last year's award, but it has also not been shortlisted for this year's Women's Prize. So yeah, I know lots of people have felt very divided about this book, had lots of different opinions, but yeah, for me personally, it really worked. Next we have Homesick. And this novel has an average star rating of 3.78 based on 1,251 ratings, so very respectable. A 5-star review comes from Jason, who says, "Wow, stunning book, almost lost for words to describe what I've just been through. I don't think I've ever been at the mercy of a master wordsmith as I have been here. Wow. I was engrossed very quickly. The simple use of words and short chapters work well to get the characters under your skin, and then things become darker, much darker. It's one of those plots where you know where it is going, and no matter how much you shout at the book, you are not going to change a thing, and it is impossible to look away." And yeah, I love that feeling in a book, or it's a kind of bittersweet feeling, isn't it? When you want the characters so badly to make different decisions and they don't. And while that might make logical, psychological sense, we still want to see a different outcome. Then we have a 1-star review that comes from Marquette, who says, "The most fascinating part of this book is the fact that I was the first person to give it 1 star. Memoirs are always hard to review, but this one really felt disjointed to me. The love between the 2 sisters was quite beautiful, but that was the only bright spot for me." Well, so, I mean, some readers and on Goodreads, they take pride in the fact of having the dissenting opinion. So that seems to be partly the case of the reader here, although they do have have some valid criticism and are just expressing their own point of view. And also, yeah, this book has had a really interesting history where it was published in America as a memoir with illustrations, but it was published here in the UK as a novel with those illustrations taken out. I personally have not read it yet, but I'm still really keen to. Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks, and this novel has an average star rating of 3.83 based on only 618 ratings. Yeah, this was a more recent publication, so I think some people just haven't got a chance to read it yet. I'm not sure if it's been published in America and elsewhere as well. So yeah, a 5-star rating comes from Carmijan, who says, "Just brilliant, probably one of the best books I read in a while. This novel follows a young black woman through the club scene, protest movements, and her exploration of generational history. Crooks is able to capture the Black British experience beautifully by evidently building on personal or academic research. The book was subsequently able to grip me the entire way, all throughout its 3 phases set near London, Bristol, and Jamaica." And yeah, the voice of this novel is so strong, so moving. It completely captured my imagination, and I thought it was really skillful, really fascinating to read. Not all of it worked for me, but I still found it to be such a powerful reading experience. Then there is a 1-star rating from Anne, who says, "Not for me. I couldn't get into the book because of the dialect. I'm sure it's a great read if you could get past that." And yeah, that's something, a criticism I've seen multiple times, not from the majority of readers, but some readers, yeah, that had issues with understanding the language, and if some of the terms and aren't familiar to you, I think that the novel does give context for them, that you can understand them, and also that is one of the strongest things about this book. It builds this authentic voice and shows you the world from a different point of view, using different language that you personally might not be familiar with, but which is part of the lexicon of the characters in this book. So it's only natural that they speak in this way, and it's much more powerful because of that. Children of Paradise, another one of these titles that I've not read yet, and this has an average star rating of 3.51 based on 1,322 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Helen McClory, who's a great author. She's a really fascinating British author that I really recommend reading. And she says, gloriously disgusting, bloody, alluring, an ode to a vanishing world of old, filthy, gaudy, independent cinemas and the curious souls who work there. One for any fan of their local flea pit. That's a great review. And it's great because it shows what she admires most about this book and really loves about it, but also how there are elements of it that might be off-putting to some readers and it might not work as well for some other readers. Yeah, that's really great. And then there's a 1-star review that comes from Katerina, who says, I've never given a classification lower than 2 to any book and never wrote a full review, but this book was simply beyond my tolerance for disturbing descriptions. The only reason I did not DNF this book was because I listened to the audiobook on my commute, and it was a short one. I found it to be a story based almost exclusively on awful, gratuitously disgusting descriptions, unlikable characters, and pretentious references / comments. Wow, okay. So, well, yeah, and that's again showing that this isn't going to be a book for everyone because of the content, but really that makes me all the more curious to read it. Stone Blind by former Women's Prize for Fiction nominee Natalie Haynes, and she has another novel which has been longlisted this year but not been shortlisted. This has an average star rating of 3.91 based on 16,888 ratings, and a 5-star review comes from Robin, who says Natalie Haynes transforms the Medusa story we've been fed into a layered history of the women at its center and the monster we've all been taught to fear. Stone Blind delivers exactly the kind of retelling I have been craving, inexplicably rich, lyrical, and wound up in tragedy. Distinctive with this one is the emphasis on the intersection of time and place, with all characters that coalesce into the Medusa myth. A 1-star rating comes from Tanya, who says, I love Medusa, so I was willing to give Haynes a second chance after her novel 1,000 Ships missed the mark for me. I wanted a modern feminist retelling that puts Gorgon at the center of the narrative. But I guess that I'll have to keep looking for one, because this novel, despite being subtitled Medusa's Story, was anything but. It wasn't her story, but the story of Medusa. Big difference. That just makes me think of Pretty Woman. Big mistake. So yeah, that's really interesting, because obviously readers' expectations of what they're going to get from a book really might color their experience of that novel, and obviously for this reader was expecting something very different from how Natalie Haynes chose to structure and tell this story. I've not read it yet, but yeah, another one I've been wanting to get to. Why, if it isn't Demon Copperhead? Here we have this big, beautiful novel with an average star rating of 4.53 based on 119,830 reviews. Yes, this is a book which has already been snatching trophies. So many readers have been reading it. Oprah's Book Club pick. It's been very popular, very successful, and much loved, obviously, because of that rating. A 5-star review comes from Chris, who says, smart, surprising, poignant, powerful, wrenching, and wonderful. So deeply moving. I will never write a novel this good. Drop the mic, Barbara Kingsolver, drop the mic. Yeah, so Chris is an author himself, and so yeah, it's just admiring Barbara Kingsolver's talent in this novel. And yeah, I totally agree. I'm so happy to see more love for this book. But now a 1-star rating for this novel that comes from Christine, who says, I've read everything Barbara Kingsolver has written. She's an outstanding writer, and I've got her up on a literary pedestal. I'm a BK stan. So no one is more surprised than I am that I did not like this book. There were good themes here, some good messages, as there always are with BK. But this one felt preachy. It also felt juvenile to me at times. Worst of all, I felt nothing for the protagonist. So for me, this was not a good read. Lots of folks are raving about this one, so you might like it. P.S. This release notwithstanding, I'll still be first in line to buy her next one. So I wouldn't want to refer to Barbara Kingsolver as BK, because that just makes me think of Burger King. And so, yeah, I wouldn't put it that way. But yeah, I was really surprising to call it juvenile. I mean, it's from the point of view of a young person who didn't have like a huge amount of education. So maybe that's sort of why it kind of felt juvenile to this reader, but also to feel nothing for the protagonist given everything that he goes through. That's just really surprising and a bit bewildering to me. So I'm just really surprised, especially as a fan of Barbara Kingsolver, BK, that she would feel this way. But yeah, readers just sometimes have these responses and have different opinions, and that's just how she feels. Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This has an average star rating of 4.07 based on 13,774 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Jackie Wine, who is a long-standing blogger friend of mine. I love her opinions. She's such a great reader, a really wonderful person. She says, Louise Kennedy's debut novel Trespasses has been picking up excellent reviews over the past few months, and rightly so. At heart, it's a quietly devastating book steeped in the tensions of a country divided by fierce sectarian loyalties. It's also quite a difficult one to summarize in a couple of sentences, at once both an achingly tender story of an illicit love affair and a vivid exploration of the complex network of divisions that can emerge in highly charged communities. Yes, I totally agree, and that is so beautifully put. I love it when reviewers, make it reviewing into an art form and really write about a book so beautifully, especially one that they feel passionately about, as Jackie obviously feels about this book, and as I feel about it too. So now, a 1-star rating comes from a reader called Saf, who says, "This is not it. I hated the writing style. What do authors have against quotation marks? They are useful. They are needed for a reason. Use them! Multiple exclamation marks. The plot itself was boring, and the worst thing is, it had so much potential, but nothing happened until the last 100 pages. By that time, I was bored out of my mind, didn't care, and wanted it to end." So yeah, sometimes a writing style of a book, if the way an author has chosen to write it, if you find that off-putting as a reader, then yeah, that's going to be a niggle point as you continue reading it, and I think you just probably won't come around to it. You'll just become increasingly irritated by that choice that the author has made. So obviously not using quotation marks is a big no-no for this reader. And but yeah, I agree that the ending of the book is really thrilling and suspenseful, but I was still gripped by the mood and the style and the characters throughout this entire novel. Cursed Bread, a novel that I felt very mixed about, was my first read from after the Women's Prize long list was announced. This has an average star rating of 3.36 based on 1,711 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Roman Clodia, who says, A second read for me, and this time we clicked wonderfully, possibly because I read the book in 2 sittings and allowed myself to be steeped in the strong brew of words and images without worrying too much about where it was all going. This seems distinctly Freudian, with the play of sex and death, of madness and trauma, where the usage of symbols operate as a form of dream work and can't necessarily be decoded in any rational one-for-one way. That is so interesting because, yeah, I'm sure a second reading of this book would give me a different impression and understanding of both the style and the character and the story. So yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to return to this at some point. I've heard some other readers say that on a rereading, it was a very different experience for them. And this very interesting with the official judges. They will be reading all of the shortlisted books twice. And so, yeah, their experience of these books might be very different from readers like me who have only read the book once. So a 1-star review of this book comes from Jody McPherson, who says, I really wanted to love this one. I think it truly depends on your preferences because I can 100% see why people rave about this book. That being said, it wasn't for me. It is a short book that felt like 500 plus pages when I was reading it. If you are looking for an unhinged, claustrophobic narrator, then defo have a go. So yeah, that's interesting because, yeah, parts of this book did really feel like a slog for me. So even though it is quite short, it did kind of drag on for me at some point. The Dog of the North. And this novel has an average star rating of 3.64 based on 1,302 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Elise Walters, who says, so effing good, all in caps. I didn't censor that expletive. That is censored by the reviewer. Nobody writes like Elizabeth McKenzie. She is brilliant, hilarious, creative as hell. I'm spent. I could not put this novel down. It's a little like the wild dreams Paul has sometimes. Crazy, wild, filled with charming sensations, sentences, words, bizarre, beautiful moments, nutty and great. Great and nutty. That's a great review. I really enjoyed reading this novel. It's not the best out of this lot or other books that I've read this year, but such an enjoyable experience. And part of that, I think, was because at the timing I read it, I'd been reading some really serious, heavy books, and this novel was much lighter while also dealing with interesting and some serious themes. So a 1-star review comes from L. Freyton, who says, absolutely one of the worst reads ever. I only opted for it as it's on the Women's Prize long list this year, but give me grace and understanding that this is in the same universe as Haynes, Kingsolver, O'Farrell, and even Croft, a dreadful cast of madcap characters who are linked in ways that felt, at best, uninteresting. Lost death with oddly truncated experiences of grief, humor, lacking any and all wit, a narrator whose pathos read little more than pathetic. Wow, yeah, that's really strongly and interestingly put, and I can understand why this novel wouldn't be for all readers, and possibly if I'd read it at a different point and in a different frame of mind and mood, I would have been slightly irritated by this book as well. But for me personally, it really worked. Black Butterflies, a novel I read recently and thought was so moving, really powerful. This has an average star rating of 4.37 based on 870 ratings. So yeah, not as many ratings for this book. A 5-star review comes from Jen Burrows, who says, Black Butterflies is a compelling piece of historical fiction, a very readable account of civilian life during the 1992 siege of Sarajevo, empathetic and immersive. It's a story of humanity and community in a war zone, a story of survival when everything seems to be be falling apart. Yeah, really agree. It's such a strong story, and I'm so glad that so many more people are going to be reading and discovering this book because it's been listed for this prize. And like I said in my review of it, I don't think I would have read it or found it, come across it, if it hadn't been for this prize, which is why I love following book prizes. So a 1-star review comes from Roman Claudia, who says, "Sorry, I don't want to sound like a book snob, but this is far more commercial in writing style, tone, and attitude than I expected. Lots of those cold needles of panic pierced my stomach type sentences. Ugh. I was interested in the subject matter, but this feels superficial in treatment and with no subtlety or nuance or additional historical insight or any sense of knowledge beyond that which anyone outside of the former Yugoslavia could have read in the newspapers. Just not my type of book." That's really interesting to read, and yeah, I can kind of see how the style, I would say, is like somewhat simple in how it's written, or kind of like straightforward maybe in how it's written, but for me that was really effective because of the content of the story, the meaning, the power behind it. So yeah. Another very popular, much read book by a former Women's Prize winner, Maggie O'Farrell, The Marriage Portrait. This has an average star rating of 4.06 based on 73,841 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Jen Can, who says, "My heart is singing and racing as O'Farrell hums, stuns, and spins a tale of an arranged marriage of a 15-year-old girl, Lucrezia, to Alfonso, the Duke, 27 years of age. This girl, with insight beyond her years, the premonition she will die at the hands of her husband." This O'Farrell weaves a story of such vivid colors, the details in everyday moments in paintings, in her portrait, the transformation of child to adult with the intuition of wisdom, a character study so intimate I felt like I was wearing her skin. That's a kind of vivid way of putting it, but yeah, I mean, largely I agree. It totally immerses you in this character's point of view. You feel the real peril of her story, and but also this society around her, the way she creates it and shows it and portrays it so vividly that I really felt like I was there. So a 1-star rating comes from Alyssa, who says, "Though I love beautiful prose, I find that when a book is overwritten, I'm pulled out of the story. Instead of being absorbed in the pages or feeling invested in the protagonist's troubles, I'm constantly kept on the surface because of the constant reminder that, well, I'm reading words that the author thought sounded pretty together, and that's why there are so many of them on the page, because the author could not quite stop themselves. When it comes to writing a plot or character-driven narrative, sometimes less is more." So it's interesting to criticize an author for using a lot of words, because that's what a book is. It's a lot of words put together. But I understand the point that, sometimes books can feel overwritten. They could be much more powerful when put in a concise way. I didn't find that in the case of this book. I really enjoyed the language and how that brought the feeling of this time period and these characters and this situation to life. But that's just my perspective, and obviously it didn't work that way for Alyssa. I'm a Fan, another novel that's been getting a lot of book prize attention. This has an average star rating of 3.56 based on 3,542 ratings. A 5-star review comes from David, who says, "I am, well, a fan of this one." And of course, like all reviewers are going to make that like joke of like, I'm a fan. So Sheena Patel has written a scorching social critique that touches on male entitlement, social media fixation, asymmetrical relationships, and the patriarchal and racist social structures that holds it all in place. So yeah, that's a great way to put it. I've still not read this book, but yeah, it's one I know I really should have got to, and I'm looking forward to, and I'm hoping I'll be a fan of I'm a Fan. And yeah, of course, you have to make that joke. A 1-star rating comes from Georgia, who says, a lot of words to say, very little. I feel as if there was an interesting commentary in there somewhere about race and misogyny, but it was all lost under so much endless whinging. So yeah, another reviewer that feels like too many words were used in a book. But yeah, didn't work for her. Pod. This will be interesting to see what people make of this book. So this has an average star rating of 3.66 based on 783 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Sarah, who says, despite the dark and difficult subject matter, this book was so delightful to read. I know some readers felt distracted by the various perspectives, but they were all so unique and interesting to me that I didn't mind, and I connected well with them all. I truly didn't expect to feel so strongly about a book with animal protagonists, but I loved it. I think it showed the environmental effects of what we're doing to our oceans without being too preachy. So yeah, that's a really nice and fair-minded review. That's obviously considering how lots of people have lots of different opinions about this novel. I've still not read it. It's my last one from the shortlist to get to, so I'll be reading it very shortly before the winner is announced. A 1-star review comes from Julia, who says, this one was anthropomorphizing hell. Hated every minute of this story from page 3. I was promised good eco-fiction and the plight of seas and creatures within it. Instead, it was told through the stories of horny crustaceans, dolphin gangbanes, and sperm-teeming waves. WTF. What's upsetting is that the writing skill is there, but the story is very much not. It's beyond me how this made it into the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. And yeah, I know a lot of readers have been feeling similarly baffled. I'm really interested to see what I'm going to make of it. Wandering Souls, another novel that was a favorite from the long list for me, and another book that was such a great discovery that I'm not sure I would have read if it hadn't been listed for this prize. Such a great experience, and an average star rating of 4.22 based on 2,355 ratings. I'm really happy to see such a high rating, average rating for this novel. A 5-star review comes from Cherie, who says, this is a story of family, loss, war, memories, and the lasting repercussions of war. A story of searching for a new life in a new land, not out of choice, but out of necessity if you want to continue living. I read this without stopping, except to highlight passages often. This is an unforgettable story, beautifully written, if often heartbreaking. Yeah, such a wonderful review of this book, and I totally agree. Yeah, I also frequently stopped and was copying out quotations, noting down my thoughts, because yeah, it is so... It's so thought-provoking. It makes you really consider the situation and the way the author chose to frame this story. So powerful. Now, a 1-star rating comes from Books and Ariel, who says, I'm finishing it at 95%. Don't care about the vague closure at this point. Very underwhelming, clumsy and boring with messy chronology. This was a YA historical fiction memoir, political essay, at best, with unremarkable infantile writing, unoriginal immigrant story, and characters. Totally disagree. I totally disagree with that opinion. Yes, every reader is entitled to their own opinion, but I do not agree with that one. I couldn't imagine finishing a book, having read 95% of it, and just saying, like, no, I'm not going to read the last few pages. Why would you do that? I couldn't imagine ever doing that, even with a book I wasn't enjoying. So that's really strange. And I thought it was totally original, really powerful. That's my opinion. The Bandit Queens. This novel has an average star rating of 3.94 based on 11,880 ratings. A 5-star review comes from Sophia, who says, "I loved this. Funny, dark, plenty of food for thought woven in. Shroff takes on the cause of women and lays down the battle lines, and her jabs are intelligent, thoughtful, and true. Superbly told. She turned them into bonobos. And please do go and read the book to see what in the hell that means." The bonobos, this reference to it, it's sort of an ongoing joke in the book, and I found it very funny, and the way this novel uses humor to look at very dark subject matter I found really effective. Now, a 1-star review comes from Rachel, and I'm assuming she's going to disagree. She says, "None of the characters are very likable. The women are petty and emotionally immature. I would rather watch Real Housewives. At least there's character development there." Oh, snap. Okay, well, yeah, I don't agree with that. I really enjoyed this novel and thought it was really powerful and so smart the way it was told and framed. So I think actually, the opposite. It is really emotionally mature in that way. In realizing that to deal with such difficult subject matter, you need to sometimes use a different technique to tell a story rather than just lingering on that. And another great discovery from the Women's Prize list that I wouldn't have read otherwise. And finally, the final book from the long list, we have Memphis. An average star rating of 4.13 based on 24,301 ratings. This has a 5-star review from YouTube's own Fraser Simons, who says, "Objectively, it did take me a bit to sink into it. There is a heavy moment deployed early on that makes it feel like it will be derivative, and the prose work does feel like a debut sometimes. It would be fair to call it uneven. However, those aspects shrank with every page until they became nitpicky, especially when contrasted to the final construction. This pulls off in 1/3 the length, and I think much better overall, what the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois attempts." Now, that's a really great balanced review, except for the cut at the end against the novel The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which I loved. I thought it was totally surprising and inexplicable that that novel wasn't listed for the Women's Prize in the year that it was eligible. But otherwise, Fraser, great review and summary of this book, which I felt somewhat mixed about, mostly quite positive about. So I think that's really fair. And it's interesting that, how early on we might not be getting on with the book, but as it goes on, the voice or the characters or the story just might grip us so much that it becomes a 5-star read for us. So a 1-star rating comes from Carrie, who says, "This author doesn't deserve your time or money. She's horrid, and I hope someone from her team gets her under control. Grazie mille," and then an emoji of an eye roll. So this is referring to the controversy around the author Tara M. Stringfellow, who has been clapping back against some readers and their opinions online when they've been expressing them, and when they have not invited her to the conversation, but she has jumped in, given her own opinions, and she often uses this phrase "grazie mille" in her snappy comebacks to readers' responses. So that's what this person is referring to, and this adds to the complication that has been increasing in recent years as authors have been going online and interacting with readers, and the real difficulty of that, I'd say, in general, in authors, in general, authors should stay away from readers' opinions and just let them have their opinions, let them have their discussion. Once a book is published, it's kind of out of your control. You just have to give it up. But I can also understand why some authors couldn't help jumping in to give their 2 cents, even when it is not invited, and really detracts from readers picking up this book, and why some readers will respond more to this controversy about the author than the book itself. And really, I think it should be all about the book itself. But yeah, that's a whole other thing which I didn't want to get into. But let me go through, tally up what are the highest ratings of these books to see if there's an alternative shortlist and what the winner is. And here we have it, a slightly alternative shortlist based on popular ratings. There are 4 books in common with the official shortlist, but 2 are different, Memphis and Wandering Souls. So I'm really happy to see Wandering Souls on this different shortlist. And it was really easy to tally because all 6 of these books have an average star rating of 4 or higher, where all the others were under that. And out of these 6 books, the winner with the highest average rating is Demon Copperhead with an average star rating of 4.53. Sorry, I just dropped some books off from my lap while picking this up. And in my excitement and continued enthusiasm for this novel, which I've had all along, I'm so happy to see this book getting more attention, more people reading it and being celebrated, even though it is such a popular novel. Now, that is the doorbell, so I'm going to have to go answer that. But I'd love to know in the comments below, did you enjoy this overview of the prize and all of these books? It was just a different way of looking at all these different titles. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with this alternative shortlist? Do you wish this was the actual shortlist? Let me know in the comments below. Let's have more discussion about it, and I'm going to go answer the door. Thank you for watching, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.